Thin, desperate whimpers were almost swallowed by the oppressive humid darkness and the distant mournful howl of the wind as it tore through the ravaged landscape. Marcus Thorne, Regional Director for Emergency Power, paused, his hand still on the casing of a smoking transformer junction box just outside the Willow Creek Estates community clubhouse. His senses already heightened by the adrenaline of managing a region-wide blackout in the teeth of a Category 3 hurricane, snagged on that sound. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal, it was a child, small, terrified, and very close. He tilted his head, the beam of his heavy-duty flashlight cutting a swathe through the inky black rain, still lashing down in intermittent, angry bursts. The clubhouse, a sturdy brick building, should have been a refuge, or at least empty and secure. But the sounds, muffled and weak, were undeniably coming from within. A small, choked sob, then a series of frantic, tiny thumps against what sounded like a door. He moved towards the main entrance, his boots crunching on fallen leaves and debris. The doors were locked, solid. He circled the building, his flashlight beam dancing over darkened windows, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead, dripping from the brim of his official jacket. Another whimper, clearer this time, from a window on the side, a window that was set too high for a child to reach. The room it belonged to was an internal one, likely a storage area or a small office. No light emanated from it, just that pathetic weakening cry. A knot of ice formed in Marcus's gut, colder than the storm wind. He was out here assessing critical infrastructure failures, trying to get grids back online, to restore power to hospitals, to shelters. But this was immediate, visceral, and wrong. He found a more accessible cluster of windows near what looked like a small administrative office at the back of the clubhouse. One was slightly ajar, the latch broken by the storm's fury. He pushed it open wider, the screech of metal, a loud intrusion in the relative quiet between gusts. "Hello," he called, his voice low but carrying. "Is anyone in there?" Only the child's whimper answered, a little louder, now a desperate hiccuping sound. He had to get inside. Marcus Thorne was a man defined by crisis, a man who thrived on order, rested from chaos. For the past 18 hours, he had been the calm eye of the storm for the entire coastal region, coordinating hundreds of personnel, rerouting power, making impossible decisions with lives in the balance. His days and nights were usually a blur of schematics, logistical nightmares, and the constant thrumming pressure of responsibility. He was 42, with lines of fatigue etched around his eyes that no amount of sleep ever seemed to fully erase. But his gaze was sharp, his movements economical and precise. He lived alone, his life too, consumed by the unpredictable demands of his job for much else, though he harbored a quiet longing for the simple domesticity he so often worked to protect for others. He knew Willow Creek Estates. It was a sprawling suburban enclave, known for its manicured lawns and an overzealous homeowners association. It was also perilously close to a major substation, one he was personally inspecting after it had gone offline. He had just left a tense briefing at the county's Emergency Operations Center, the air thick with the smell of coffee and anxiety maps spread across tables like fallen dominoes, each red marker a problem he needed to solve. The hurricane, dubbed Isabel, had been a brutal visitor, leaving a trail of snapped power lines, flooded streets, and terrified residents in its wake. His teams were stretched thin, but they were making progress sector by sector. Willow Creek was on the periphery of one of the first zones targeted for phased restoration, hence his presence. He'd seen the downed lines near the entrance, the massive oak split in two across the main access road, standard storm damage. But this sound, this child's distress, was anything but standard. Inside the clubhouse, the air was thick, stale, and unnervingly warm. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing overturned pamphlets in the lobby, a bulletin board askew. "Hello," he called again, louder this time, his voice echoing in the empty space. The whimpering led him down a short corridor. He found the door, heavy oak with a formidable-looking lock. The sounds were definitely coming from behind it, small fists drumming weakly. "Hey," Marcus said, his voice gentle, pressing his ear to the wood. "Hey, little one, can you hear me? My name is Marcus. I'm here to help." A tiny, shaky voice responded, barely audible. "Mommy, want my mommy." "Your mommy will be here soon, I promise. Are you okay in there? Are you hurt?" "Dark," the voice whispered. "Scared. Can't breathe good." That last phrase sent a fresh spear of alarm through Marcus. Can't breathe good. Asthma panic attack. He tried the handle. Locked, of course. Okay, buddy, I need you to stay calm for me. Can you tell me your name? Leo. The small voice quavered. Okay, Leo, I'm going to get you out of there. Just hang tight. He assessed the lock. It was a commercial-grade deadbolt. No kicking this door in without serious effort and potentially injuring the child on the other side. He needed a key, or a battering ram. Just then, he heard a commotion outside, voices raised in anger and distress. He hurried back to the front, peering through the glass panels of the main doors. A woman drenched and distraught was pleading with another woman who stood ramrod straight, holding a large umbrella like a weapon, her face a mask of stern disapproval. You can't just keep him in there, Karen. He needs me. He needs his medication. The distraught woman's voice was raw with panic. She was African-American young. Her clothes soaked through her eyes, wide with terror. This had to be Leo's mother. The other woman, older white, with a helmet of stiff blonde hair that seemed to defy the storm, was unmoved. Sarah, I've told you. The community emergency protocol is clear. Unattended minors in the designated safe zone during a lockdown are to remain secured until the all-clear is given by the HOA president. That's me. He was making a terrible racket, he was upsetting the order. Probiat order. He's a child. He's 8 years old. He has asthma. He's terrified of the dark. Sarah cried, tugging uselessly at the locked clubhouse door. I was gone for 10 minutes. 10 minutes to get his spare inhaler because you told me this was the safest place. Karen Miller. Marcus recognized the name. He'd heard whispers about her from some of his own staff who lived in Willow Creek. A petty tyrant, obsessed with rules, quick to fine residents for the slightest infraction. She was the HOA president, and apparently she had just imprisoned a disabled child. Marcus stepped out, letting the office door click shut behind him. Ma'am, he said, addressing Karen his voice level, but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority that made both women turn. What exactly is going on here? Karen Miller looked him up and down, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes at the interruption. His jacket, though official, was unfamiliar to her. This is an internal HOA matter, sir. This woman, Sarah Washington, left her child unattended in a designated emergency area. For his own safety and to maintain calm, I've secured the room. Secured the room? Marcus repeated, his gaze hardening. You mean you locked him in? It's for his own protection, Karen insisted, though a slight defensiveness crept into her tone. The storm is still a threat, and the child was agitated. Sarah whirled on Marcus, fresh tears streaming down her face. Please, he's my son, Leo. He can't breathe properly when he gets scared. He was having a panic attack when I left him to get his nebulizer parts and extra albuterol. She told me this was the safest place, that someone from the HOA would be here. When I got back, she'd locked him in that tiny storage room. It's not a storage room, it's the auxiliary meeting space, Karen sniffed. And he needs to learn to control himself. We have rules. Marcus ignored Karen for a moment, focusing on Sarah. He said he's having trouble breathing. How bad is his asthma? It can get bad quickly, especially with anxiety, Sarah choked out. He has a portable nebulizer, but the battery was low and I was getting the spare cartridges. I wasn't gone long, I swear. Marcus turned back to Karen, his patience wearing dangerously thin. The distant critical substation and the regional power grid momentarily faded in urgency compared to the child trapped behind that door. Ma'am, I don't care what your HOA rules are. There's a child in there in medical distress. You need to open that door. Now. Karen bristled. And who are you exactly to be giving me orders? This is private property, and I am in charge of security and safety for Willow Creek Estates. She exuded an unshakable, infuriating self-righteousness. I'm someone telling you that you are currently endangering a child's life. Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous timbre. Open the door, Ms. Miller. I will not be bullied, Karen stated, crossing her arms. The situation is under control. He just needs to calm down. A little discipline wouldn't go amiss. Sarah let out a strangled sob. Discipline? He's terrified. He's black. He's a child, and he's disabled. What is wrong with you? Karen's lips thinned. This has nothing to do with his background. It has to do with maintaining decorum and safety during a crisis. Marcus had heard enough. This woman wasn't just misguided, she was cruel, blinded by her minuscule authority. He knew her type. They festered in little fiefdoms of power, their own insecurities metastasizing into a need to control and punish. The storm was an inconvenience to her. Her rules were paramount. Ms. Miller, Marcus said, pulling out his official identification. The gold shield and the bold lettering of his title, Regional Director, Emergency Power and Crisis Management, seemed to catch what little ambient light there was. I'm Marcus Thorne, and right now your private property is part of a declared disaster area. Your actions are directly interfering with emergency protocols. Real ones, not your HOA fantasy guidelines. You are actively preventing a child from receiving medical attention. Unlock that door, or I will have you arrested for obstruction, endangerment, and anything else I can think of. Karen Miller's eyes, which had been narrowed in haughty disdain, widened almost imperceptibly. She looked from the ID to Marcus's face, a flicker of uncertainty finally dawning. The man before her was not some concerned passerby. His tone was not one of negotiation. It was a command backed by a level of authority she hadn't anticipated. The wind howled again, rattling the clubhouse windows, as if underscoring his words. She blinked, her carefully constructed composure wavering. For a moment, she seemed to deflate the bluster seeping out of her. Well, she began, her voice suddenly less strident. I may have misplaced the key to that specific room. With the power out, things are a bit disorganized. Marcus stared at her, his expression unreadable, but radiating cold fury. Misplaced it, or you don't want to admit you've massively overstepped. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to Sarah. Stay here with me. We're getting Leo out. He keyed his radio, the squawk of the channel cutting through the storm's noise. Dispatch, this is Thorne Actual. I have a situation at Willow Creek Estates Clubhouse. Child locked in a room, medical distress, possible asthma attack. I need immediate paramedic assistance and police presence, and find me a fire crew with breaching tools expedite. Copy, Director Thorne, the calm voice of the dispatcher replied. EMS and PD en route. Fire unit with tools being diverted, ETA 7 minutes, Karen Miller gasped audibly. Fire crew breaching tools. That won't be necessary. The door is standard. I'm sure I can find the key. Your time for finding the key is over, Ms. Miller. Marcus said, his eyes never leaving hers. You had your chance to do the right thing. Now you're going to witness the consequences of doing the wrong one. He gestured with his head towards the clubhouse interior. Which room is it? Karen, now pale and visibly shaken, pointed a trembling finger down the corridor. The third door on the left. The auxiliary meeting room. The wait for the fire crew was the longest 7 minutes of Sarah Washington's life. She paced. She prayed, she called Leo's name softly through the thick oak door, her voice trembling. Marcus stood beside her, a silent, reassuring presence, though inside a cold rage was building. He'd seen incompetence, negligence, even stupidity in his career, but this level of callous, self-important cruelty was something else. Karen Miller hovered nearby, wringing her hands, her earlier arrogance replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding of the trouble she was in. She kept muttering about protocols and misunderstandings, but Marcus ignored her. The only sounds that mattered were Leo's weakening cries and the approaching wail of sirens. The firefighters, grim-faced and efficient, arrived with their Halligan bar and a small hydraulic spreader. Marcus gave them a brief, clipped explanation. Child 8, asthmatic, locked in. Mother on scene. Let's be quick and careful. The team leader nodded. Understood, Director? Karen made one last desperate attempt. Please don't break the door, it's custom oak. The HOA will have to pay for... Marcus cut her off with a look that could have frozen lava. The HOA will be lucky if that's all they have to pay for Ms. Miller. He then nodded to the fire captain. Do it. The sound of the Halligan bar biting into the door jamb was brutally decisive. Wood splintered. The lock groaned, and then with a final sickening crack gave way. The door swung inward into the pitch-black room. Sarah pushed past them, her phone's flashlight beam finding him immediately. Leo was curled in a fetal position in the far corner, his small body shaking his breath, coming in shallow, ragged gasps. A small, overturned plastic chair lay beside him. The air in the tiny windowless room was hot and fetid. Leo, "Oh, baby, mommy's here," Sarah cried, rushing to his side, gathering him into her arms. He clung to her, burying his face in her shoulder, his small chest hitching. Paramedics were right behind her, their kits ready. "Ma'am, let us take a look," one said gently. Marcus watched as they quickly assessed Leo-administered oxygen and checked his vitals. The child's face was pale, his lips tinged with blue. Another few minutes, Marcus thought grimly, and this could have been a very different outcome. He felt a wave of profound relief, quickly followed by a surge of cold anger, directed at the woman still babbling about property damage. The police officers who had arrived with the paramedics were now taking statements. One of them, a Sergeant Miller, no relation. Marcus noted with grim irony approached him. "Director Thorne, what are your wishes regarding Ms. Miller here?" Marcus looked at Karen, who flinched under his gaze. Her face was a mixture of fear and indignant disbelief. "Sergeant," Marcus said, his voice calm but unyielding, "I want her formally detained. She knowingly imprisoned a minor child, withheld medical access, and obstructed an emergency response during a declared disaster. We'll sort out the precise charges later, but for now, she needs to understand the severity of her actions and secure this clubhouse as a potential scene. I want a full account of who authorized this emergency protocol of hers." "Yes, sir," the sergeant replied, nodding. He turned to his partner. "Cuff her," Karen Miller shrieked. "Cuff me. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." "This is an outrage. I was following procedure." "Your procedure almost killed a child, Ms. Miller," Marcus said flatly, as the officer efficiently and dispassionately placed her hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was a small, satisfying sound in the charged atmosphere. "Perhaps in a jail cell, you'll have some time to reflect on the difference between rules and basic human decency." As Karen was led away, still protesting loudly, Marcus turned his attention back to Leo and Sarah. The paramedics were preparing to transport Leo to the hospital for observation. Sarah, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes, holding a universe of gratitude, looked at Marcus. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You saved him." Marcus offered a small, weary smile. "Just doing my job, ma'am, and any decent human being would have done the same." But he knew with a chilling certainty that Karen Miller wouldn't have. And that was the problem he now had to address, not just in Willow Creek, but across the entire region. This incident, born of petty tyranny and prejudice, had just become a catalyst for something much bigger. The infrastructure of power lines and substations was one thing. The infrastructure of compassion and common sense was another, and today it had failed spectacularly in Willow Creek. He would fix both. He had to. The hours that followed were a blur of official reports, media inquiries, which he kept brief and factual, focusing on the child's safety and the ongoing investigation and coordinating with his teams who were still battling the widespread outages. The storm, Isabel, was finally moving inland, weakening, but its legacy of damage was vast. Leo was stable at County General Hospital, Sarah by his side. The initial fear had subsided, replaced by a quiet determination in her eyes that Marcus recognized. She too would see this through. News of Karen Miller's arrest spread through Willow Creek like wildfire, even amidst the chaos of the blackout. Cell service was spotty, but the coconut telegraph was in full effect. Initial reactions were mixed shocked disbelief from some of her staunch supporters and a grim knowing satisfaction from those who had long suffered under her reign. Marcus had ordered a thorough review of Willow Creek's HOA bylaws and emergency plans, suspecting that Karen's protocol was either a gross misinterpretation or a complete fabrication of her own making. He also learned that Sarah Washington and her son Leo were relatively new to the community, having moved in only 6 months prior. They were one of only a handful of black families in the predominantly white, affluent enclave. The undertones of racism in Karen's actions, while not overtly stated by her, beyond her dismissive comments about Leo's background and need for discipline, were hard to ignore. Leo was not just a child to Karen. He was an other, an inconvenience, easily dehumanized. The auxiliary meeting room, where Leo had been imprisoned, was indeed a small windowless space, barely 10 feet by 8, smelling faintly of old carpet and cleaning supplies. The single chair was its only furnishing. Being locked in there during a power outage in the dark, with the storm raging outside, would have been terrifying for any child, let alone one with Leo's sensitivities and medical condition. Marcus felt a fresh wave of revulsion. Karen hadn't just made a mistake. She had committed an act of profound cruelty. His investigation into Karen Miller began to unearth a pattern of behavior. Dozens of complaints, formal and informal, had been lodged against her over her 5-year tenure as HOA president. Arbitrary fines for things like improperly colored garden gnomes or children's laughter deemed too boisterous. Veiled threats against residents who dared to question her authority at HOA meetings. Mismanagement of funds was also whispered about, though no one had been brave enough to demand a full audit. She had cultivated an atmosphere of fear and intimidation where residents felt powerless. The HOA board, largely composed of her allies or those too timid to oppose her, had rubber-stamped her decisions. Sarah Washington, new to the neighborhood and unaware of the full extent of Karen's tyranny, had simply been her latest and most vulnerable target. The next morning, with the storm past, and a pale, watery sun attempting to break through the bruised clouds, Marcus called an emergency meeting with the regional prosecutor and the chief of police. He laid out the facts, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This isn't just about one woman and one child," he stated, pacing the small conference room at the EOC. "This is about a systemic failure. An HOA president, drunk on her own petty power, felt entitled to imprison a disabled child. What if I hadn't been there? What if Sarah hadn't found him as quickly? We were minutes away from a tragedy." The prosecutor, a seasoned woman named Elaine Rios, listened intently. "The charges of false imprisonment and child endangerment are solid, Marcus. Reckless conduct, too. We can make those stick. What else are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about abuse of power, possibly misuse of HOA funds if we can link it to her maintaining this control. I want to send a message. People in positions of authority, even in a damn HOA, have a responsibility to protect, not to terrorize. And I want to look at hate crime enhancements. Her comments, the specific targeting of Sarah and Leo, it needs to be explored." Chief Davies nodded. "My detectives are already digging into Miller's background and her conduct as HOA president. We've had a surprising number of Willow Creek residents come forward overnight, willing to give statements now that she's been removed. It seems your actions broke the dam, Marcus." "Good," Marcus said. "Let it flood." He also knew this was a wake-up call for his own department. While his teams were experts at restoring power, the human element of emergency management, especially concerning vulnerable populations within insulated communities like HOAs, needed strengthening. How many other Karens were out there with their own twisted interpretations of emergency protocols? How many other Leos could be at risk? He spent the next few days not only overseeing the colossal task of power restoration across the region, but also drafting new guidelines, new training modules for local authorities, and even for HOAs themselves on properly handling emergencies, with an emphasis on inclusivity and the protection of disabled individuals and other vulnerable groups. The Willow Creek incident, as it was now being called, became his Exhibit A. The first HOA meeting in Willow Creek after Karen Miller's arrest was an extraordinary affair. It was held in the clubhouse, the offending auxiliary room door, now boarded up, a stark reminder of what had happened. The place was packed. Residents who had previously been too intimidated to speak out now found their voices. Sarah Washington was there. Leo holding her hand, looking small and a little overwhelmed, but also resolute. Marcus attended not in his official capacity as regional director, but as a concerned member of the broader community, though everyone knew who he was and what he had done. One by one, residents stood up and shared their stories of Karen's bullying, her arbitrary fines, her dismissive attitude towards their concerns. A picture emerged of a woman who had systematically crushed dissent and fostered a toxic environment. The remaining HOA board members, those who hadn't been Karen's closest cronies, looked shell-shocked. Then Sarah Washington spoke. Her voice was quiet, but firm, filled with a mother's pain and unwavering love. "My son Leo is a sweet, gentle boy." She began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "He loves drawing superheroes and watching the birds in our backyard. He also has asthma and he struggles with anxiety. What Karen Miller did to him, to us, was not about rules or safety. It was about power. It was about cruelty. She saw a black child, a child who was different, and she decided he didn't matter." Tears welled in her eyes, but she continued. No child should ever be made to feel the terror Leo felt. No parent should ever have to experience the horror of knowing their child is in danger, locked away by someone who should be protecting them. This community, it can be better than this. It has to be. A wave of emotion swept through the room. There were tears, nods of agreement, even a few hushed apologies directed towards Sarah. Then an elderly man, Mr. Henderson, who had lived in Willow Creek for 30 years and had often clashed with Karen, stood up. "Sarah, on behalf of the decent people in this community, I want to apologize. We let Karen go on for too long. We were cowed. We were complacent. Your courage and Mr. Thorne's intervention have opened our eyes. We owe you and Leo a debt of gratitude, and we owe it to ourselves to ensure this never ever happens again." His words broke the tension, and a spontaneous applause filled the room, an applause not just for Sarah and Leo, or even for Marcus, but for the possibility of a new beginning for Willow Creek. An interim board was quickly nominated and approved, comprised of residents known for their fairness and common sense. Their first act was to suspend all of Karen Miller's recent fines and to schedule a full independent audit of the HOA's finances. The legal proceedings against Karen Miller moved with surprising speed. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimonies poured in. The discovery that she had, in fact, specifically taken the only key to the auxiliary room from the clubhouse office and locked it from the outside, then lied about misplacing it, sealed her fate on the premeditation front. Her defense attorney tried to paint her as a well-meaning but overzealous community leader, stressed by the storm. The jury didn't buy it. The image of a small asthmatic child locked in a dark room struggling to breathe was too powerful. The testimonies of other residents about her reign of minor terror demonstrated a clear pattern of abuse of authority. During the trial, Marcus was called to testify. He recounted the events calmly and factually, his voice steady, but his eyes conveyed the gravity of the situation he had encountered. He described Leo's faint cries, Sarah's desperation, Karen's unyielding belligerence, and the critical moments leading up to the rescue. His testimony was damning. Karen Miller, throughout the trial, maintained an air of injured innocence, occasionally dabbing at her eyes, though her expressions often hardened into resentment when witnesses detailed her past actions. She seemed genuinely incapable of understanding that she had done anything truly wrong. Her world was one of rules she created and enforced. Empathy and consequence were alien concepts. The prosecution, led by Elaine Rios, pushed hard. They highlighted not just the immediate danger to Leo, but the psychological trauma inflicted. They brought in child psychologists to explain the terror Leo experienced. They meticulously dismantled Karen's claims of acting in good faith. The hate crime enhancement was pursued, arguing that Karen's specific targeting and callous disregard were exacerbated by racial and disability prejudice, citing her prior interactions and dismissive comments. While proving this to the full legal standard was challenging, the undertones undeniably influenced the perception of her character and motivations. The rising action in the community had been mirrored by the rising action in the case against Karen. Her initial arrest was a shock. The bail hearing, where she was deemed a potential nuisance to witnesses and her bail set surprisingly high, was another. Then came the discovery during the HOA audit that Karen had indeed been misusing funds, small amounts siphoned off here and there for personal expenses, disguised as community projects or administrative fees. These weren't vast sums, not enough for a separate major embezzlement charge, but they painted a clearer picture of her character and her belief that HOA resources were hers to command. This financial misconduct became another nail in her coffin, demonstrating a pattern of entitlement and deceit. One particularly shocking revelation during pretrial discovery was that Karen had received specific training pamphlets from the county regarding emergency preparedness for HOAs just 6 months prior. These pamphlets explicitly warned against actions like confining individuals, especially vulnerable ones, and emphasized immediate contact with emergency services for any medical distress. She had signed a receipt for these materials. This directly contradicted her claims of merely following accepted protocol or being unaware of the proper procedures. It suggested a willful disregard for established guidelines in favor of her own authoritarian impulses. The media, initially focused on the dramatic rescue, now delved deeper into the HOA culture of Willow Creek. Investigative journalists published pieces on HOA nightmares, using Karen Miller as a poster child for associations run amok. This brought national attention to the issue, and other stories of HOA overreach began to surface from around the country. The midpoint of the public narrative, perhaps, was when Sarah Washington agreed to a televised interview. She spoke with quiet dignity, not of revenge, but of the need for accountability and change. She described Leo's ongoing struggles with nightmares and his fear of closed doors, but also his resilience, his drawings of a new superhero, power director man who rescued kids from mean rural ladies. Her grace and strength resonated deeply with the public, further isolating Karen Miller and galvanizing support for systemic reforms in how HOAs were governed and overseen, particularly in emergency situations. Marcus, meanwhile, was working tirelessly behind the scenes. The Willow Creek incident had given him the political capital he needed to push through his proposed regional safety improvements. He met with state legislators, county commissioners, and representatives from various community organizations. He presented his plan: mandatory emergency training for all HOA board members, clear communication channels between HOAs and local emergency services, grants for communities to install backup power in clubhouses or designated safe zones, and a special registry for vulnerable residents who might need assistance during crises. He faced some resistance, mostly from those who decried government overreach into private communities. But the story of Leo and Karen was a powerful counterargument. Images of the small dark room and the testimony of a frightened child cut through the political rhetoric. The climax of Karen Miller's downfall occurred in the courtroom during her sentencing. The jury had found her guilty on multiple counts: felony false imprisonment of a child endangerment, and misdemeanor official misconduct related to her HOA position tied to the violation of established emergency protocols she had been trained on. The financial irregularities were presented as aggravating factors, demonstrating her untrustworthiness. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Althea Hayes, listened to the pre-sentencing reports, Karen's tearful but ultimately self-serving plea for leniency. "I was only trying to keep order. I'm a pillar of my community. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." And the victim impact statement read by Sarah Washington. Sarah's statement was not about anger, but about the lasting scars on her son, the trust that had been broken, and her hope that no other family would endure this. Karen Miller. Judge Hayes began, her voice resonating through the silent courtroom. "You were entrusted with a position of authority in your community. You were expected to act with wisdom, compassion, and above all, with a sense of responsibility for the safety and well-being of all residents, especially the most vulnerable. Instead, you chose to wield your minor power like a cudgel. You terrorized a sick, frightened child. You dismissed the desperate pleas of his mother. You prioritized your own inflated sense of order over basic human decency and established emergency protocols you were aware of. Your actions were not a mere misunderstanding. They were a profound abuse of trust and a reckless endangerment of a young life." The judge paused, her gaze fixed on Karen, who now seemed to shrink in her chair. "The community puts its faith in people like you to be a safeguard, particularly in times of crisis. You became the crisis. The message must be sent that such behavior will not be tolerated. It is the sentence of this court that you will serve 3 years in the state penitentiary for the felony counts. Further, you will pay restitution to the Washington family for therapy costs and emotional distress, the amount to be determined in a separate civil hearing. You are also permanently barred from ever holding a position on any HOA board or similar community governance role within this state. As for the HOA funds, while not rising to the level of a separate felony, the pattern of misuse is noted and will be reflected in the conditions of any future parole." A gasp went through the courtroom. 3 years. It was a significant sentence. Karen Miller swayed, her face ashen, and had to be supported by her attorney. Justice, it seemed, was not just blind. It could also be sternly clear-sighted. Marcus was present in the courtroom, sitting quietly at the back. He felt no elation, only a grim sense of closure. A necessary consequence had been delivered. The falling action began almost immediately. Karen Miller was taken into custody directly from the courtroom. The image of the once imperious HOA president being led away in handcuffs was a powerful symbol of accountability. Her appeals, predictably, were later denied. In Willow Creek, the healing process was well underway. The new HOA board, with community input, rewrote many of the most oppressive rules. Transparency became their mantra. They organized community events designed to foster connection, not division. They installed a new top-of-the-line backup generator for the clubhouse and established clear, compassionate emergency protocols working directly with Marcus's office to ensure they were sound. Sarah and Leo Washington, once outsiders, became integral parts of the community. Leo, with therapy and the unwavering support of his mother and new friends, slowly began to overcome his anxieties. His drawings of Power Director Man became more joyful, less about rescue, and more about adventure. He even started a little emergency preparedness club for kids in the neighborhood, teaching them to make go-bags with flashlights and snacks. Marcus's proposed regional safety improvements gained traction. The Leo Washington Act, as it was informally dubbed by a supportive state senator, passed with bipartisan support. It mandated standardized emergency training for HOAs, required the establishment of vulnerable persons registries in every county, and provided funding for community resilience projects. The act cited the Willow Creek incident as a key impetus for its creation. Marcus found himself somewhat uncomfortably hailed as a hero, though he consistently deflected the praise, emphasizing the courage of Sarah and Leo and the collective responsibility of communities. The infrastructure upgrades he had been championing for years also received a significant boost. Power grids were hardened, smart technology was implemented to identify and isolate faults more quickly, and communication systems between utilities and emergency services were overhauled. The memory of Hurricane Isabel and the subsequent crisis in Willow Creek served as a stark reminder of why these investments were crucial. The resolution was multifaceted and deeply resonant. Karen Miller served her time emerging from prison, a diminished figure, her reputation shattered, her assets depleted by legal fees and restitution. She faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in HOA meetings across the state. Willow Creek Estates transformed. It became known not for its rigid rules, but for its strong sense of community, its proactive emergency preparedness, and its welcoming atmosphere. The annual Willow Creek Resilience Fair, started by the new HOA board, became a popular event celebrating community spirit and sharing safety information. Leo Washington, growing into a confident young man, often gave a small presentation at the fair about how to stay calm and help others in an emergency, his personal story, a beacon of hope and strength. Sarah became a respected voice in local advocacy for disability rights and community safety. Marcus Thorne continued his work as Regional Emergency Power Director, his responsibilities heavier, but his resolve stronger. The events had changed him too. He found a deeper connection to the human side of his work, a renewed understanding that true power wasn't just about restoring electricity, but about empowering people, fostering resilience, and ensuring that the systems designed to protect society actually did so with compassion and integrity. He even started volunteering some of his rare off hours at a local youth center, sharing his knowledge of science and engineering, finding a quiet satisfaction in nurturing young minds. The final scene could be set a few years later at one such resilience fair in Willow Creek. The sun is shining. Families are laughing. Children are playing. Leo, now a teenager, is confidently demonstrating how to use a hand crank radio to a group of younger kids. Sarah watches him, her eyes filled with pride and love. Marcus is there not as an official, but as a friend. He catches Sarah's eye and they share a smile that acknowledges the past trauma, but celebrates the present strength and the future they have all helped to build. The power is on in every sense of the word. The community is not just restored, it is renewed stronger, more connected, and more humane. The echoes of a small, frightened whimper in a dark room have been replaced by the sounds of laughter, learning, and a community that truly understands the meaning of looking out for one another. The infrastructure of empathy had been rebuilt stronger and more resilient than any power grid, and that Marcus knew was the most critical restoration of all.